This video is for section 8.2. Our objectives in this section are to solve quadratic equations using the quadratic formula and use the discriminant to determine the number and type of solutions. So we're going to start with the quadratic formula. Quadratic formula states that the solutions of a quadratic equation when it's in the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So just like with factoring, we need to have 0 on one side of the equation, are given by the quadratic formula which is x equals negative b plus minus square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. So what we're going to do is we're going to plug in the numbers for a, b, and c, the coefficients in the equation, and that's going to give you our two values for x. Now, the plugging in is the easy part with these. The simplifying is the part that's a little bit tricky, especially with MyMathLab, because they're going to want things to be completely simplified, and so even if you have the right answer, things are going to be marked wrong if they're not completely simplified. So example 1 we're going to look at first. It says to solve using the quadratic formula. In this equation, we already have 0 on one side, so that is not something we need to do. We can just move on to plugging directly into the formula. So I'm going to label A, B, and C, and then I'm going to plug in here. So it's going to be negative b, b is 2, plus minus square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c. If there's a negative sign in front of the variable, then that needs to be included as well. And then everything divided by 2a. So once I have everything plugged in, what I'm going to do is simplify what's under the square root first and get that down to a single number. Then that's going to tell me what other simplifying steps I may need to do. So 2 squared is 4. And now you have to be careful because there's a minus sign and then a minus sign here. So minus 4 times 8 times negative 1, those two minus signs combine to make a plus. Even though they're kind of far away from each other, those two minus signs are going to be minus negative, and then that's going to make a positive. So that's one of the first common ways to make a mistake, is to get the sign wrong at that step. I'm going to do 2 times 8 here and get 16. And now I'm going to add those two numbers under the square root together. 4 plus 32 is 36. So what I have here is I have the square root of 36, which is a perfect square. So sometimes when you're at this step, you can't simplify anymore. Sometimes you can. And in this case, I can because 36 is a perfect square. So if you try to enter this into MyMathLab, even though all the work that we've done so far is correct, MyMathLab is going to mark it wrong because it's not fully simplified. So square root of 36 is 6. And from here, what I'm going to do is split this up so I get two answers. So I'm going to do one with the plus sign, negative 2 plus 6 over 16, and one with the minus sign, negative 2 minus 6 over 16. So if the square root simplifies to a whole number, then you're going to split it up and get two answers. If it doesn't simplify to a whole number, then you can just leave plus minus with the square root. But if it is a perfect square, then you're going to need to actually take the square root and then get two separate answers. So negative 2 plus 6 is 4. This is going to be 4 over 16, which is 1/4. Negative 2 minus 6 is negative 8. Negative 8 over 16 is negative 1/2. You are also going to need to want to reduce fractions, because if you put in a fraction that can be reduced, my math lab is going to mark it wrong. So my two answers here are 1/4 and negative 1/2. And in my math lab, just like we saw earlier with these problems, they're going to have a bracket. You're going to type the answers in the bracket separated by a comma. Do not put parentheses around them. It's not an ordered pair. These are two possible solutions for x, so it's more like a list of solutions. So you type it in just like that. With the fractions, they're going to want you to enter the fractions and not decimal approximations, so just be aware of that as well. So that's my answer for example 1. So next you should try checkpoint problem number 1. Do this in your notes, check your answer, and then move on with the rest of the video. Next, we're going to look at example 2. It says solve using the quadratic formula. In this case, we do not have 0 on one side of the equation, so that's going to be my first step, is to put 0 on one side of the equation. I'm going to move the 4x and the 1 over. Although with this, keeping a leading coefficient positive is not quite as important, but I usually like to do that anyway, just out of habit. So that would give me 2x squared minus 4x minus 1. If you moved the 2x squared over and had minus 2x squared plus 4x plus 1, it should come out to be the same answer in the end. So you can do it that way also. So this is going to be my equation, 2x squared minus 4x minus 1 equals 0. And I'm going to label A, B, and C, and then plug in. Now, when I'm plugging in this one, it's minus B. If B is negative, that's going to be minus negative 4, which is going to change to plus 4. So another place where you can make a little sign mistake that gives you the wrong answer. So negative B, negative 4 is plus 4. Then it's going to be B squared. When you're squaring this, even though it's negative, it should come out to be positive. Negative times negative is positive. Minus 4 times A times C all over 2A. So start by working with what's under the square root. Positive 4 plus or minus. Negative 4 squared is positive 16. And then this is going to be plus 8. 4 times 2 times negative 1. And since it's subtracted, again, minus negative changes to positive. And then we're going to have 4 plus minus 16 plus 8 is 24. So what happens with this one, I don't get a perfect square under the square root. 24 is not a perfect square. However, it is a root that can be simplified. And again, if it can be simplified, you need to do that. If it couldn't be simplified, then I would just be done here. So if it was square root of 23, for example, there's nothing that can be divided by that's a perfect square, so the problem would just be done. But since it's 24, 24 is divisible by 4, that means it can be simplified, since 4 is a perfect square. So square root of 4 times square root of 6, square root of 4 is 2, so I can simplify that to 2 square root of 6. Now, there's one last thing that I can do to simplify here, and that's looking at these three numbers, the 4 here, the number in front of the root, not the number underneath the root and the denominator. If there's a number that all three of those numbers can be divided by, that can be taken out. So in this case, there is such a number. They can all be divided by 2. So the 4s, I'm going to divide by 2 and get 2. The 2, I'm going to divide by 2 and get 1. So this is going to be 2 plus or minus 1 times square root of 6. I can just write as square root of 6 and then put a 2 on the bottom. So this is the answer. Again, you're looking at the 2 numbers on the top, not the number under the root and the denominator. If there's something that they all can be divided by, that can be taken out. So next you should try checkpoint problem number 2. Do this in your notes, check your answer, and then move on with the rest of the video. Lastly, we're going to look at example 3. Again, I don't have 0 on one side, so I'm going to start by putting it in that form. So I'm going to add 4x to both sides. And when I do that, I'm going to make sure that I write it in the middle so that I identify the correct values of a, b, and c. So a is 3, b is 4, c is 2. So go ahead and plug into the quadratic formula. Negative b plus minus square root. B squared is 4 minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. So start by working on what's under the square root. 4 squared is 16. 4 times 3 times 2 is 12 times 2, which is 24. Now in this case, I don't have any negatives, so that minus sign is going to stay a minus sign, because I don't have any. 4 times 3 times 2 is positive 24. So 16 minus 24 is negative 8. Now, simplifying the square root of negative 8, this is going to use imaginary numbers. So we're using all the stuff that we used back in chapter 7. What I'm going to do is use the I. That's going to be I times square root of positive 8. 8 can also be simplified because it's 4 times 2. So I would write this as 2i square root of 2. So we have negative 4 plus minus 2i square root of 2 over 6. Now looking at these three numbers, they can all be divided by 2. 4, 2, and 6. So this is going to become 2, this is going to become 1, this is going to become 3. Divide them all by 2, and that leaves me with my answer. 2 plus minus I square root of 2 over 3. The book shows breaking this up into separate fractions, which you can also do, but if you enter it this way into my math lab, that'll be fine. It'll accept that for the correct answer. So next you should do checkpoint problem number 3. Do this in your notes, check your answer, and then move on to the homework.